That's why they can only have water. Okay. So I'm about to throw something at you. Please don't. Please don't. Jeez. I don't know why this takes so long. It's also my first time doing it. Okay, it says it's now streaming. So I wanted you to kind of just talk about, one, why you feel the way you feel about mental health and mental stability as a pastor, and why do you think there's a difference in theology, I guess?
Well, I mean, being a member of a body of Christ or a body of believers doesn't make you immune to life's challenges, whether they be mental health, whether they be trials, tribulations. You know, I tell people all the time that when there's scripture about it, it's because God knew we were going to go through it. He didn't expect you to have it all figured out just because you walked down somebody's center aisle on a Sunday morning and gave your life to Christ. Life still happens. People still have depression. People still have anxiety. People still have, we talk about praying for bereaved folks who, loved ones pass on. So I think it's a fallacy in ministry to think that everything just magically goes away because you give your life to Christ. And to treat people like they are somehow less faithful, or they're not praying hard enough, or they're not reading their word enough because they're not able to think themselves happy or quote enough scriptures to themselves where they overcome those challenges, is also, for out of respect to my brothers and sisters of the cloth, it's a misinterpretation. It's a misinterpretation.
Okay. So why do you think? My experience has been, I think I've been to one large church that spoke about mental illness in a way that didn't involve, you can pray your way out of this. Obviously, knowing you, I've heard that differently for years now, but I know that I've also been to another mega church and been told that my diagnosis was me believing the report of man and not the report of God, which also deterred me from getting treatment.
Yeah, and I will say this. I mean, it's not just mega churches. It's not just certain type of churches. We are human beings who accept a savior or a belief or have a faith that it goes along with our shortcomings. Janae Tidwell is trained to be a therapist. I had some hours of training as part of my theological background to counsel. That doesn't make me a gifted or skilled counselor. And I tell people all the time, just because your pastor can preach, doesn't mean he or she can counsel. So, there's some folks that don't recognize their own abilities and or limitations. And therefore, we try to apply what we feel like we've got a good handle on to all situations. And it's just not that way. It does not mean you're faithless because you have to go to a therapist. God made therapists as well. God made medicine as well. So because I can't pray my cancer away, does that mean that I don't have faith? No, I might need to have faith to find the right, doctor to give me the right, chemotherapy and radiation. So I just think that you have to use wisdom. There's no magic switch. When I got ordained, I didn't all of a sudden become enlightened on how to supernaturally take someone's anxiety or depression or mental health issues away. They weren't able to do it in the garden with Jesus. Literally, they couldn't even stay awake and feel the anxiety that he felt. And he literally felt it so severely that his body manifested it with blood coming through his sweat glands. They weren't able to do it with the demoniac. They literally tried to chain this man up. And as crazy as he supposedly was, he never took his own life. He never ran off of a cliff. But when he met a counselor, a man named Jesus. Jesus asked him some questions, got an understanding. Yeah, he did something supernatural after that, but it literally showed you how much he was fighting for his life and to break through his mental challenges, because what was going on in him was enough to make an entire herd of animals run off of a cliff. And this man had that inside of him for who knows how long. So I just think it's one of those things where, the same thing that we tell people that they need to use to work on them, we need to apply it to ourselves. I might be a great teacher, I might be a great pastor, but that doesn't make me a great therapist.
What do you think we need to do as the body of Christ to further the conversation and embrace more people that might need both? So, they're going to a therapist because they've been shunned, they've been turned away, they've been made to feel less than in a church community because, they deal with depression and they're tired of pastors and deacons and everybody praying over them, but not really directing them to a path of getting help. Something that I've seen in a lot of churches is that's the extent of the help that they provide. They're not encouraging people to go out and get the help. They just say, we're going to continue to pray for you and, keep you lifted. I'm going to check on you next week kind of thing. So what do you think needs to happen within the church community, the body of Christ, to, one, bring them back into the fold, embrace them, and help them get that healthy dose of both the spiritual and the therapy?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to speak for myself. What I typically didn't know or understood, I mistreated, or I handled it the wrong way. I think that as long as those kind of discussions and awareness sessions don't happen when the majority of the body is there. In fact, I got to give credit to Patrick. I remember saying to him, man, I sure wish we could have this kind of discussion on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. And he literally asked a simple question: why can't we? And it wasn't until I got out of my theological church Sunday morning service head and said, hey, that's when I've got the majority of the people there. This is the group that really needs to understand, mental health issues and things like that, because they're probably dealing with it unbeknownst to us in their own home.
Did everybody freeze or just me?
No, I
There you
can
go.
still. Yeah. So, again, I had to step out of the box and give us some awareness. And once that happened, the feedback was amazing. Even as a minister, I'm not the thing that's going to work for somebody's good. I am one of the things that will work together for someone else's good because they love the Lord and has been called according to his purpose. So I should be able to work with Janae Tidwell as opposed to against. Oh, I don't know why she's telling you that. You just need to pray more. Have you tried to fast? And you got to leave some other stuff alone. No, I need to let her be the professional in her area and work in concert with her. Making sure that you're doing the things that she's counseling you and doing what she has the expertise to tell you to do. But again, for me, it started with awareness. It started with using that quality time where we have the largest number of people there to bring about awareness, because if anybody does their research, it's all throughout the Bible. It's all throughout the Bible.
So last year for Mental Health Awareness, you invited me to actually sit with you in front of your congregation and tell my story. So often I think when it's not impacting us personally or someone we know personally, we don't really see it. So I just wonder now, and I don't think this crossed my mind to ask before, but did putting a face to mental health and mental stability and mental illness within your church help further?
It definitely did. Yeah, it definitely did. And let me tell you what else it did. And God kind of revealed it to me after the fact. So, and I'm just using my son or somebody close to me as an example. When it's someone that's close to me, I also know the other things about them too. I know when my son might have been trying to use, again, just an example, it's not necessarily a fact, but where my son might have been trying to use the excuse I'm having a mental health episode as a excuse not to do what he's supposed to be doing or something like that. So because I'm so close to it, I deal with it differently. But when it's you, whom I know and whom I respect and whom I've seen, operate with, as in a normal manner, and I don't mean to say that it's abnormal, but you're functional. You're able to do life. You're able to be a mom. You're able to, raise children. Now all of a sudden, it's not so much that was acting. It literally could have been what he said it was, even though he could articulate it. My thing would be, well, if you can tell me what it is, then you're probably not dealing with it. When the reality might be, you've dealt with it longer than me, so you might be able to identify what I can't or what I might ignore. So you literally helped a lot of people. In fact, I know a family in particular that started to look at a family member differently because of your testimony that
That is kind of humbling, because I can remember back to that day, that morning, I really didn't want to get up there. I didn't want to do it because, one, you wonder, sitting in front of an entire church of people, whether you know them or not, what are they going to say when I step down from this platform? Because no one's going to boo you in church, but what are they going to say about me when I step down? How are they going to react? How are they going to receive their pastor for even bringing the conversation to a church service and not having it be this little workshop we do on the side on a Saturday morning? So I was wondering what that was going to look like at the end for both of us. I know it was scary for me because that's the first time I think I stood up in front of a church and said something like that, and was very candid about everything that had gone on. And you had me repeat a few times that I was in ministry and attending church every Sunday and still somehow managed to have that breakdown and end up in the hospital after a suicide attempt. And I can remember the silence that came across the whole congregation, because it kind of dispelled the myth that if you go on Sunday and you're praying and you're faithful and you're doing everything right, you can somehow stave off that breakdown. You can push all of that aside and it's just gonna overcome you and it'll go away. So that was a scary silence, I'll say that, because I thought really at that point people were shutting down, but then there was more attention and I could see the reactions after that. So I want to thank you for doing that, one, because I don't know that that's something common. But when you talk about working like with Janae, how hard is that to do, to have, therapists that will communicate? I know there's confidentiality there, but if they're seeing someone, how hard is that to coordinate somewhat of a support system? So we talked about that last week, how important a support system is, but let's be honest, not everybody has one.
Right.
So how difficult would that be from both of your perspectives to be able to set up something like that for a person?
Yeah, I'll speak from my standpoint as a shepherd. It's not my responsibility to be the end all be all. And I get that. I get that very, very well. As a shepherd, my responsibility is to get the members of the body to the place where they can get the best help that they can get for the thing that they need help the most. All too often, churches have literally made people feel like there's so much wrong with you, and I'm the only one who can fix you. So show up every Sunday morning, show up every Wednesday night, show up every VBS. And the reality is, I might need you in session somewhere with someone who can give you the expertise. I said the other day, I might be the general practitioner, but it might come a time when I have to refer you to a specialist, and I got to be okay with that. And I am.
Yeah. at least from my standpoint as a therapist, right, creating a team approach to treatment is always the best thing to do, right? And so we, as therapists, understand that there may be a psychiatrist involved, there may be a medical physician involved, there may be a teacher involved if it's a child, or something like that. So getting all of these perspectives to help a client is ideal. And for us, it's just a matter of having a form signed, right? Like, I just need a form to say it's okay for me to talk to Pastor Jones about you because he's involved in your care, right? As long as I have the form and he and I can connect, and it's for your overall treatment and improvement of your mental health, then that's it. Now, sadly to say, I know a lot of therapists who don't take the time to do that, right?
Mhm.
Who don't take the time to connect with those people, to make those phone calls, to have those conversations for the overall treatment of their client. Um, I know that it should happen way more than it does, I feel like, professionally, from the therapists that I know. But as far as how difficult it is, it's a form. That's it. It's nothing else.
I was thinking there was something legally you had to do, but I could essentially come to you and say, I have a pastor that I'm seeing. He referred me to you or said I needed a therapist, but he wants to be there in support of me, and I'm going to give you permission to talk to him.
I'm going to grab what we call an ROI, release of information, which you're going to fill out. I'm going to sign. I'm going to get that faxed or emailed to him, and then hopefully schedule a time in which to talk to him. That's it.
Wow, that sounds so simple that I wonder why that's not something that happens.
It's unfortunate because it truly is that simple, right? And I think I make it a practice to make sure we connect with people who the client identifies to be in their treatment team. We have a specific question on our intake paperwork that talks about that, right? Are there people that we are allowed? Can I contact your physician? Can I contact your psychiatrist? Can I do that, right? So we have that as an initial question on our intake forms off the top, right? To know if that's something the client is open with. Because sometimes even the client doesn't think to even say, hey, I want this person to be able to talk to you and give you a perspective. They don't even know that it's able to be done, right?
Right.
Or they think it's way too difficult. So sometimes it's just knowledge and education about the whole thing. But
and I think that's a good, because most people wouldn't know to ask. Most people wouldn't know that that was even an option. So my brain is kind of turning right now, because I think that is something people need. Part of my process, the first 30 days out of the hospital, I got my therapist, but I also had people that were making sure I wasn't alone too long, checking on me every day. And if they didn't hear from me in so many hours, everybody would call, and it wasn't so much, we don't want you to, we're scared you're going to do this again. It's just, we need to keep reminding you that people are looking for you. People will miss you. People need to know you're okay. And, for 30 days, that's what happened. I can't remember a night that I was alone for 30 days. And it wasn't my kids there, it was friends coming to spend the night, or, hey, let's go do something. So, that was important, because I the first 30 days out of the hospital, I would have been in my home alone, and who knows where my mind would have gone. So, I was also very blessed to have that, and have that in multiple people. And, if this person couldn't talk to me, they got on the phone and said, hey, call her and talk. I can remember last year, I hit a very low moment, and one of my Facebook friends called my godmother, who then texted me and then texted my godfather and said, you need to put eyes on her today. And, that doesn't happen for a lot of people. So I appreciate it. And I know I'm blessed because of that. But how many people don't have that could have saved, or could save at some point? So I think it's something we should all consider and try to figure out how to make that more the norm than I do it, but I know a number of people that don't.
Right.
Because again, I could be talking to my therapist about one thing and then be talking to my pastor about something else. The two need to meet at some point in order for me to be balanced. And that's what this whole kind of thing stemmed from. And part of my recovery, that first 6 months out of the hospital, my physician was putting me on medication, but my therapist didn't know what the medication would do. He didn't understand. He didn't know. He was like, well, I don't think you need it, but take it if you feel like it. And it kind of clicked, like, he might want to know if this medication is altering my personality, if it's doing something to me that it shouldn't be, side effects that are coming from it. But I also had my physician say, give me your therapist's information. I'm going to send him a form so I can know what's going on with you.
Right.
Because for her, it was, if I'm giving you this stuff and it's making you hallucinate, I need to know immediately that that's happening. And I may not see you for 3 months because I don't have to see you for 3 months. So that changed my life, because then when I found out, all the genetic stuff that goes on, I found out that hypothyroidism ran in my family. She took me off of all of it because she said, I don't need to make you mentally well and then kill you later on. So, and then that also kind of clicked that I had to tend to all facets of myself, not just, I'm a focus on the mental today. Tomorrow I might go run and eat healthy, and then, I'm gonna go to church on Sunday. So it was more of we got to balance all three in order for me to be okay on all fronts. So, yeah, I know you've got to go, Pastor AJ. Thank you for joining us. And I think I'm going to be in touch with you about a program that I have in mind now.
Okay.
I always got work for you, right?
And we've got to do part 2 to that mental health awareness at the church. So whether it be bringing you on, via live stream or whatever, we got to do it, because that wasn't a one and done. And the breakthrough that some people got, sometimes you got to make sure that the thing is broken and reinforce it, is basically what I'm trying to say. We'll definitely follow up on that. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this great conference, and I hope I'm making a difference.
You are.
Appreciate you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Janae, we talked last week about trusting your therapist.
Yes.
So, and even in this week's message, we were talking about faith yesterday and the spiritual reflections, and it brought me right back to trust, because having faith without trust really doesn't go together. And part of having faith that you get better is trusting in the process, no matter what it looks like, and no matter what point you are in that process. So what if I am with a therapist? We have history, I've been going to them, but I have this moment where I realize I don't trust them with everything. I don't trust them to have this particular conversation. Like we've talked about 95% of what I want to talk about, but this little 5%, I'm gonna hold on to, because I don't really trust them to advise me or to lead me through what I need to get this resolved.
So the first thing I would say is, what's preventing that person from that little 5% of trust, right? What's keeping them holding that to their chest? Is it, concern of judgment, or is it guilt on their end that they don't want to fess up and own up to? Is there some shame behind what's going on? If you've been working with this professional and they've, helped you thus far, what's preventing you from really being transparent with them, right? Then the second part to that, I would say, would be thinking about having just that conversation. Like, I know I can get real with some of my clients and say, we can talk about the stuff that you don't like that I say. right? We can have that conversation, right? So if the client's able to be like, hey, there's some stuff that I've been wanting to get off of my chest, but I'm scared. I don't know if I trust that it's going to be safe to say that in here. And then actually just having a conversation about trust between the two of those people, right? That's something I would encourage the client to do, right? Because on the therapist end, it's not about you not trusting me per se, right? I don't have any jurisdiction on your day-to-day life in that regard, right? So you cannot trust me and I can go home and I can still sleep.
Right.
Right. So it's not personal is in the end, right? It's not a personal thing about me that you don't trust. There either is something about the process of therapy you don't trust, or you don't trust that we can really do anything about that issue. And that's why you don't want to bring it up, right? But it has nothing to do with me as a person, you not trusting. So we need to, to even be able to talk about that, I think is huge, and it would be a major, even that work itself is major, even if we don't get to the thing that you're scared to talk about.
Right. So would you say in a situation like that, that maybe the issue isn't so much that you can't trust your therapist, the issue is more internal than the person sitting in front of you? Because to me, I feel like if I don't trust you at all, I'm not going to open up. So if there's a piece of me that can't open up, that doesn't feel immediately that I can just go through this whole process with someone, I'm going to stop. And I know that sounds crazy, right? But it's just like if I have a physician or an OB or, a mentor that I can't trust fully, I'm not going to continue down that path of going with them. So my question really is, how do you know when it's you and not so much the therapist that's the issue?
I think that you're going to know, like if you don't trust and have a good rapport with that therapist, you're going to know that in the first, 3 to 4 sessions, right? You're going to be like, okay, I have a real good feeling about this, or I feel like I, can connect with them and I feel comfortable here, or you're never going to get comfortable, right? If you get at 3 to 4 sessions, you're going to know. If you continue down that path and you're into 10, 20 sessions and there's still an issue of trust, then that doesn't have anything to do with the therapist. That, I believe, is absolutely an internal thing for that client, and they're battling either with that issue or with their ability to kind of be transparent about some things that are going on with them. So you're going to know real quick. Like I think I said this in the first go around in regards to trust. Like I'm not going to go and sit down with a hairdresser that I don't trust or I feel iffy about after the first time. I as a woman am not going to feel iffy about my OBGYN and go back, right? Same thing with your therapist. You're not going to keep going if you feel iffy. That defeats the purpose.
Okay. So have you ever encountered a client that was so far gone? I don't want to say far gone, that sounds weird, but that you just felt like you couldn't help. Like they were so set in their ways, they are this person, they want to be this person, and you couldn't help them.
So I've had clients that maybe have left and not fully resolved the issue they came in for, right? Mm-hmm. And for a number of reasons. One, I wasn't the right fit. So they couldn't be comfortable. They couldn't become transparent, just like we're talking about, right? So I wasn't the right fit of therapist. 2, they weren't completely ready to do the work, right? They wanted to feel better, but understanding that, to feel better, you got to talk about hard stuff. You got to look in the mirror at some stuff that ain't pretty. You got to do some things in that process that they weren't ready to do. And they just wanted kind of that instantaneous relief, right? Some people think that therapists have fairy dust, mm-hmm. and they come in and they sit down and I'm gonna say some magic words and this like starry thing is gonna appear over you and then you're gonna walk out feeling great, right? Like mm-hmm. It does not work that way.
Right.
So there have been people that I felt like have left, my office or the therapeutic process with me and didn't get what they were looking for. Yeah, it's happened.
Do you feel like you've had patients that stop too soon? So like you talked about the fairy dust. Like I can't say that I've wanted fairy dust at all, because I usually, when I'm going into therapy, because I'll start and stop for various reasons, when I'm going in, I already know I'm going in because, all right, this is some stuff. And it's like like, listen, I'm about to dump a whole bunch of stuff on you. You let me know if you're ready to deal with it or not. And I'm talking to the therapist, not the other way around. My new therapist, been seeing him for almost a year now. And the first day I went in, I said, look, I've been in therapy since I was 16. So I've been down this road. I got tons of tools in my arsenal. I know how to journal. You got to come with new tricks. If you're not prepared for that, tell me now. Because for me, it's like, clearly what I have isn't working. So don't give me the stuff you give everybody else. Give me something new. And you always see these memes and you hear people talk about people quitting just before they hit that breakthrough, like just before they break through that brick wall they've been trying to get through. Have you had a patient do that, and have you felt free enough to say, I think you need to come back so we can touch this, so we can keep pushing forward in this?
Definitely so, right? So I've had some people that were in the midst of the process and I thought we were making real good work, and they were starting to feel some symptom relief, right? They were starting to feel a little bit better. And so they were like, oh, okay, well, I'm good. And, removed themselves from treatment, right? And I was like, like you want to call and bring them back, right? Because that there's still some work left to do. And then there are some clients that you build really good rapport with, and most of my clients, I get to that point where I can get real candid with them and say, okay, you realize that we just uncovered some stuff, and that was a whole ball of wax that you didn't come in initially stating were your goals for treatment initially, right? Like, right. But then I'll ask, do you want to do that work, right? Because it's not up to me to make them do that work. We can uncover it, and if you could say, you know what, I'm good right now. I know it's there. I uncovered it, but I'm gonna just kind of put it on the shelf for a little bit because I'm finally feeling stable, feeling good, and I just kind of want to ride this wave a little bit. You should have that.
Is that advisable?
So I always say the patient is the one who dictates what's happening. Do I think that you need to put everything on the shelf and not look at it again? No. But I do, like we talk about, I do think you need to be ready to do the work, right? So like you said, you've stopped and started various times because when you stopped, you felt like you were at a place where you could stop. It was okay to stop, whatever. When you went back in, you was ready. Mm-hmm. So the patient has to be ready to do that work. And if they're not at a place to do that, then me pushing them or forcing them to look at some things and to talk about some things could be more harmful than it could be helpful for them at that time. So, don't put it on the shelf and forget about it. That's just the key.
Okay. So, and I'm asking this because I know I've been in places where I'm like, I think I'm good. I'm a bow out for now. And then it recurs, so I end up back. But I've also been in places where I discover things about me and I say to myself, yep, it's just gonna be what it is for now. Or, the people forget or don't recognize how traumatic therapy can be at times.
Yeah.
Because, having to dive through a traumatic experience for the second time opens up old wounds, and you see it differently and you expose different things that may not be directly related. But in doing that, I have reached points where I'm like, I need a break from therapy because I can't come out as heavy as I did before. I've had sessions where I went in kind of light and was just gonna kind of shoot the bull, but then we hit something and I'm like, okay. And it's a week of, do I really want to go back and talk about this? Because I think if you have a good therapist, they recognize we got to go back to the subject. And while they give you a good one also kind of gives you the opportunity to say yay or nay, they haven't forgotten. Like, well, not everybody writes notes down. Y'all know. Y'all know. You're like, yeah, we got to come back to that. So, and I respect the ones I've been to because I have been like, they'll be like, we're gonna gloss over it, and I'm like, yeah, we are, but okay, we'll come back to it. And sometimes I come back to it on my own, and sometimes they just remind me later on. So, how do you feel about a patient? Like for me, I feel like when you go to a therapist, you need to know what you want to work on. You need to have an idea of why you're there because y'all can't read our minds. You can't decide from a hello that, oh, we need to get you diagnosed. We need to deal with trauma. We need to deal with this. So I encourage people to start writing just daily. Just start writing about your day. Even if you don't feel like something's wrong, write about your day, how it went, how you felt about how it went. And then I know when I started doing that, I discovered certain things would make me angry for no reason. And they were little bitty things. I noticed that when my house is not clean, I get extremely frustrated and I feel overwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed because it's the same things that have to happen that day. But because the house is a mess on top of everything else, I am now sometimes, depending on how bad it is, depending on how bad the day is, I might feel like I'm going to fall apart, and just cleaning my room up can calm me down and get me back into perspective. So, you know, how do you feel about that?
No,
myself really quick.
That's quite all right. I will hold it down. I think that knowing what you want to work on when you walk in the door is extremely helpful. For sure, it's extremely helpful for the therapist because it can guide us to help you better, right? Just as if you walk into a doctor's office and they say, okay, what brought you here? Well, you have a sore throat, you have your wrist hurts, right? You know what the issue is that's bringing you there. So having that be the case in therapy or in treatment is absolutely a benefit as well. Now, I will definitely say the majority of the people who come in, they can give me their symptoms that they're feeling, but they have no idea what that means, right? So they can tell me I feel stressed out all the time and I can't sleep at night and I can't focus on things. I just kind of keep thinking about this one thing over and over and I can't seem to get control of it. Like they have no idea that what they're experiencing is anxiety, right? So I can appreciate that they come in and they just kind of give me a pot of symptoms and I can help them kind of formulate and say, okay, well, you've given me A, B, C, D, E. That is what we would diagnose as this, right? And then go from there. But if you come in like, okay, here's what my issue is. Here are my symptoms. It's being triggered because of this thing at work or this thing in my life. This is what's affecting me. Like that definitely will help. But oftentimes that's not the case. And we have to help people kind of work to get to a point. But then also you don't go to a doctor already having self-diagnosed, you don't walk into a physician and like, well, I've got these symptoms, so I think I have this. Like, you don't become a WebMD physician before you go into the doctor and tell them what's wrong with you, right? So we're also not looking for people to come in and be like, yes, okay, I have anxiety and here's what we need to do. Like, leave some room for the therapeutic process as well. So we're not looking for you to have all the answers, but we're definitely looking for you to be able to communicate what it is that you need as far as what your goals are in that regard. I like the,
Good.
I was gonna say, I like the
Huh?
comment that came in regards to what the gumbo pot of issues. How do you choose? You don't. I want the entire pot of gumbo. I want the entire pot of gumbo. So you don't choose, right? Don't, because there may be some things in that entire pot of gumbo that are going to cue me to think about some stuff that you may not think is important. But because again, that's my expertise. That's what I went to school for. It's my job to say, okay, you got all these things. What does that equate to? Like, let me help in that regard. Let me do my job in that regard.
That actually makes a lot of sense. How many people do you encounter that come in with one issue though?
Never. Never. Now, they may say, well, okay, I came in because I have this one thing, right? And then they'll start talking about it. And then as they get into it, I'm like, okay, so you came in for this one thing, but I also heard this, I also heard this, I also heard this. So they don't realize that there's some maybe other things at play that I can then point out. But it's never just one issue. Never.
So what would you say to a client like myself? You know, I think that I don't think I'm unique in that I go for periods of time and then I stop and then I come back. What would you say to a client like myself that's been through it, has all the tools? You know, we think we know enough to be okay, but you know, one thing I experienced last year, you know, I had gotten past the hospitalization, the suicidal thoughts, and then life, like in a matter of I wrote a blog about it. It was 5 months and 28 days. In that 5 months and 28 days, I think everything under the sun happened to me. It was devastating, and I felt like I was crumbling again. So, what do you say to a patient like that who knows what to do, but finds themselves just completely weakened at that point and like I can't do it anymore?
Yep. In that exact thing, I think that's how, well, I think that's huge that people understand that therapy is a supportive tool also. Now it can be definitely, I am ill, I am on, desperate times and desperate measures, and I need like intense, immediate, acute care, right? So that's hospitalization. That's IOP, intensive outpatient, right? There is that level of care. But sometimes therapy is what we call maintenance, right? It keeps you steady, right? That's like your dental 6-month cleaning, right? I don't need to go to the dentist all the time, but I need to do my 6-month cleaning and my preventative measures, right? So therapy can be that for people as well. And then you get to a good place, you're stable, you're good, you're cruising, and then life happens, right? Like you hit the biggest pothole or you blow a tire or whatever, and you need more support in that moment. That's the time to come back. So I tell people all the time, therapy should not be forever. You should not be going to your therapist from 16 until the day that you die. If so, please, pretty please, fire that therapist. They are not helping you move forward, right? And I tell this to my clients, like if we are doing and talking about the same exact thing for over a year, and I'm seeing you weekly, you need to fire me. You need to go somewhere else because I'm not getting you further along. Now, if we solve one issue, but then you discover another issue, an onion peeling, right? We peel the onion.
Right.
Or if life happens in the midst of us working on stuff, and now there's a whole second set of things that we need to tackle and talk about, okay, that's different, right? But we should not be talking about that original goal for over a year, and a year honestly is short term. 6 months to a year is short term. Even on a weekly basis, you think about it, that's 52 hours. It's only 52 hours. That's
Right.
only 2 days worth of therapy, right? Not a lot of time to be with it. But if we doing it for 2, 3, and we on that one issue, nah, man, we need to move on. Something's not working. Something's not working, right?
And that's good to hear, because a lot of times you're not going to hear, like you won't hear a doctor say, I'm not the doctor for you, or if that doctor's not doing this, fire your doctor. So it's good to hear, it's refreshing to hear someone say, like, no, I don't want you to see me for the rest of your life. I don't need to see you every week for the next 5 years, because we think that that's okay. In that moment, would you consider that to be a crutch though? If I'm still seeing my therapist, so like right now, I'm seeing my therapist more frequently than I was because I got a whole gamut of stuff going on that wasn't happening before March. But I want to get back to that. So I started with every week. We went to every 2 weeks and then every 3 weeks. Now I'm back to every week. But how do I know when I'm using my therapist as a crutch more so than using it as a tool?
So I think that it's also the therapist's job. So one, if you feel like I can't function without, right? I need therapy. I can't function without therapy. And I have to tread lightly because there are some people who need it to stay stable, right? Their illness is that chronic. It's not even acute at that point. It's chronic. It's a long time, like so chronic illnesses, diabetes, high blood pressure, things of that nature, they're going to maybe be taking medication for an extended period of time. So there are people that treat.
You would be diagnosed with something that is chronic and okay.
Absolutely. Right. And so they may need that as an ongoing thing to stay stable. Right. But I should also be, as a therapist, I should also be kind of pushing you along and saying, hey, guess what? You're stable enough. Like, I don't need to see you next week. Right. Let's go every 2 weeks. Let's see how you do. I'm always here. If you need to come back, you can, but let's see how you do with your training wheels on, right? I've done that before with lots of clients who were like, I can't, I need to come back next week. I'm like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay. And they ended up being okay, right? Now, some of them were like, okay, now I need to come back because life happened.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's normal.
That's absolutely normal, right? But
so we have this question here.
Yes.
And basically, what do you do for a client or patient or a person, so to speak, that believes that they can't be helped?
And so I'm going to try not to dip into my spiritual toes and spiritual pool too much, right? But whatever you believe is probably going to be what it is, right? Like, so that's in my line of work and my thought process, that's the client who comes in and is expecting fairy dust. They don't believe it's going to get better. So I'm going to dare you to make me better. Right? I'm going to dare you to figure out what to say and how to say it to make me feel better, because I don't believe it can happen. And I'm a strange duck as a therapist, but I'm going to tell you what, if I don't do dares in therapy, right? So if you believe that that's what it's going to be, I'm going to high five you and be like, guess what? That's what it is.
Wow. So should that person even come to get therapy? If you believe it's not going to work, should you waste the money? And I don't want to call it a waste because obviously I don't think it's a waste, but if you are at a point where you say therapy's not going to help me, I'm beyond, and it again, not trying to tap into the spiritual of that, but there are other things going on to be at a place where you feel like you can't be helped.
Right.
So would you say to that person they aren't ready for therapy?
Well, if the client's directly in front of me, I'm going to ask them, then what made you walk in this room? What made you, because you made some steps, right? You decided to call, right. You filled out some paperwork, you walked in, you're now sitting here. So there's something in you that believes differently than what maybe you're presenting to me. Mm-hmm. Now, it may be minute, but you didn't come here to tell me that I don't know what I'm doing, because you don't know me. Right? This isn't personal, right? So at this point, why did you walk in?
Yeah.
Right. And then I'm going to tap into that and we're going to move forward from there. But I'm definitely not in the in the realm of convincing people that they can be helped if they don't want to be helped.
And that's hard to do anyway, right?
It is. It absolutely
It's hard to do anyway. I think I'm out of questions. This week was about grief, so it was heavy, and I had moments where it was too much. Yesterday, I think I almost tapped out because when you talk about it, you can't. I don't know that there's anyone that will ever say they have not experienced grief in their life. But I have heard people say they've experienced too much grief, more grief than normal, too much loss at a time. What would you say to that person that feels like they've just experienced way too much grief in their lifetime? And where do you start to help them heal from it?
so. Those who have had multiple losses, and maybe multiple losses even in a kind of a short period of time, they're dealing with what I would call complicated grief, right? It's not just one process of grief, but we're now kind of built on top of each other, and grief ends up looking like a ball of yarn, right? And you don't know what loss is maybe giving you what symptom, or this loss is now connected to that one. Excuse me. And so you're trying to unpeel it to unravel all of it and straighten it all out, but it is very much convoluted. And so understanding that it's gonna be a lengthy process, one. Two, the longer you have stuffed those emotions in and not dealt with them or not processed them, then that's time that we're going to have to work to get some of that stuff out. Grief is a harder thing in my eyes for me to counsel, because you don't get to a place where then it doesn't ever affect you again.
Right.
I think you get to a place where you learn how to manage or handle some of the symptoms, and you also realize that you're going to be triggered to have moments of emotional, outbreak all throughout, right? You don't ever get over the loss. You don't ever heal from the loss, but you can get to a place where it's not detrimental or keeping you in that distressing place. You can get to a place of stability, if you want to say.
So last year I lost my grandmother, and that's why I went back to counseling. But a few weeks ago, just a conversation with my daughter, she said, "Mom, who was your high school sweetheart?" And I stopped because he passed away when I was in college. Okay. And I realized that I had not spoken about it. I had not talked about it with anybody for years. And it triggered me for some reason to have to open my mouth and say to her, my high school sweetheart died. And it was years ago. But, I've been fine, right? Like, I've been fine up until this point. The loss that I felt like I had been grieving for the last year was that of my grandmother. But her asking that question just kind of sent a flood of everybody into my mind. So how do you manage that? And is it necessary to manage that? To pick apart what you're grieving and who you're grieving at the time, right?
So I do think it's important to quote unquote pick apart. I think you need to understand what's being triggered, and maybe even for you in that moment of having to talk about it in this new light was a triggering piece. And we can have what I call emotional recollection. The hurt feels the same. And so when I have this experience here and it brings about, some type of hurt and pain, and then I have it over here and it feels the same, my mind will be like, oh, I remember that time where I felt it back here too. And then I remember that time over there where I felt it. Then I remember that time over there where I felt it. And I can begin to kind of pull all these things in and have that emotional recollection. And that absolutely happens with grief, right? Because you experience your losses in different ways at different times in your life. So for you to have a grief process, I'm sure, like when you first heard about your loss of that high school sweetheart when you were in college, that was its whole own grief process, right? But to now be an adult, have a child, be talking to your daughter kind of about romantic relationships, and then have to kind of re-experience that loss now on the tail end of another really important relationship loss, right? You're going to have another experience about it again. And it could be the same thing. You can lose a dad at 10 and then, have an experience of losing him again at your high school graduation at 18, and then at your marriage and your wedding when he's not sitting there, and then later at the birth of your child. So you can have all of these, and that can happen.
Right.
And it will happen, right? And so I think just understanding, one, it's going to happen. And two, yeah, you may have to reprocess at these different stages of your life, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that you didn't grieve right or process it right the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would you say, because you talked about just as an African-American woman in grief, right? And it resonated with me because we have to acknowledge cultural differences, and different cultures have different rules over grief and mourning, and even just burying the dead. And I know in some cultures, if someone close to you passes, you aren't supposed to make any major life decision for a year after that passing. And that can be traumatic in and of itself. Like, I lose a parent, so to speak, and now I'm supposed to wait a year. What if I had a wedding? What if I had, a move planned? All of this has to shift because of this situation. So when we talk about that being, it being different in different cultures, what would be something that you could offer in terms of helping people heal from grief, no matter what culture that is? What do you think is critical to doing it in a healthy way? I mean, we all have our vices, we all have our things that we do, and that's what I wanted to do this week, is not so much say this is how you grieve, but how do I grieve and know that I'm doing it in a way that is not going to come back to bite me later on?
It's a great question. And I've even had clients come in and be like, I know I need to grieve, but I don't know what the heck that is. I don't know what to do. What do I do? Right. And lots of people want an instruction manual on how to grieve. And I appreciate that because, kind of like I alluded to before, I think we don't do well as an American culture in talking about grief and in educating people about grief, which is crazy because, like you said, we're all going to experience it at some point, right? So it's crazy, but like we have sex ed, we almost need like grief ed, because we're all going to experience it. So how do I know if I'm grieving? What do I do? What does it look like? You're right. It's very personalized. So I can't tell you what exactly your process is going to look like with certainty, but there are a few key things I definitely can say are going to be involved, right? One, you're going to need a release of the emotion that you're feeling. And the emotions could range the gamut. We can have anger, we can have guilt, we can have shame, we can have sadness, we can have frustration at the doctor, the facility, the way that they died, the negligence, the fact there couldn't be anything done. We could have, depending upon the situation, right? You need a way in which to deal with that and express that emotion, right? Two, the goal is to try to get you to a place where you want to continue moving forward in life.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that may be a ways out, because oftentimes people don't want to continue with the new norm. They don't want to continue without that person, without that loved one. So they get to a place of feeling like, what's the point? Life's not going to be the same. I don't want this life. So I don't want to continue. I don't want to try at life anymore. And I'm always going to push my clients to say, your life is worth living outside of the person that you've lost. Right. So trying to get them to see that part of it. And then two, everything that you stuff in and you don't want to deal with or you don't want to talk about, it, just know that that's what's going to explode and come back and bite you in the booty. So be at a place where you know, getting it out is way better than keeping it in, whatever that looks like. And support, don't grieve alone. That also.
So I talked about this as well. You know, last year was the first time I got to witness my kids grieve.
Yeah.
So they were old enough to recognize my grandmother was gone. They were old enough to have had a relationship with her and know her for themselves. So that was a layer on top of my own grief, that we don't get to pretend this doesn't happen. This is no longer, you know, not necessarily their innocence is gone. You know, we say that about a lot of things, and I don't know how you take a innocent kid, take innocence away, but you know, my kids are no longer immune to it. They're not in the bubble where they haven't had to do that before. So the other side of that was also understanding that my entire family, this is the first time I've noticed it, and it's not the first time someone's passed away, but last year was the first time I noticed my entire family grieving all at once, and understanding that I can't lean this direction because that person's not ready either. And I can't lean that way because I'm not sure what that person is doing right now. I still have to navigate this, which I think is what led me to therapy at the time, because I really couldn't talk about it with the people closest to me because we were all in the midst of our grief.
Yeah.
So,
well, but I would definitely say you need a safe place where you can go, where you feel it's safe and you can dump, right? And you don't dump more on somebody else who's also trying to hold up their own stuff. But I would say I think there's something to be gained from even being able to talk about it as a family together, right? And again, I think that's what we don't do well in the American culture. I'll even go as far as to say I don't think we do it well in the African American culture at all, right? To be able to say, you're sad, I'm sad, you're sad, we're all struggling. We can sit here and kind of talk about how hard it is to be in this moment together.
right.
That's okay for us to be able to do that. And we can walk away from the moment having found the value in sharing with each other, but all of us kind of saying, well, I don't have the answer yet. It's okay. We all gonna stay in the struggle together, right? So that's, I wish we did more of that, right? I feel like if we can come together in difficult times to pray and have a conversation with our higher being, with our God, then we can also come together and have conversations of our struggle together when we're in the midst of the struggle. To me, it's a very similar process.
Is there a time frame of grief?
No.
That was very definitive. Like, if anyone was questioning that, the answer is no. There is no time frame. There's no limit.
There is not. Now, you know, people will maybe disagree and say that grief never ends. You're always going to be maybe grieving. And I don't think that you're always going to be grieving. I think you're always going to be in this continual state of processing these distressing emotions from here and until, right? I don't think that that's the case. I do think that you're going to have a time frame where you're really dealing with it, and then you should be able, again, to enjoy your life, live your life for what it is. But you're going to have moments where it's triggered.
Right.
And it's almost like a tide, right? The tide goes out and the tide comes back in. And there are going to be moments when the tide comes back in and you're feeling maybe the loss a little bit more than you did before. And those are probably going to be at some of those major developmental stages in your life where you recognize the loss and you feel the loss a little bit more than a random Tuesday, right? But I don't believe you should be in a moment or a state of distress forever. So, yeah.
That makes
But
sense.
how long you're in there?
Depends on the
yeah,
depends on the loss. It depends on the person. It depends on you. It depends on the support. And I think that is the scary part of all of this. You know, no matter what you're healing from, no matter what the issue is, there's so many factors that are going to determine that. And you know, when we try to do these things without a professional, someone unbiased, and that's what I had to put in my mind, is that I can't talk to my mom about my mom when my mom is getting on my nerves.
yes, you cannot.
Mom's not going to understand that. So, and that goes with just about everything. You know, where do you find that person that's unbiased in every situation? You know, talking to my sister about my mom when my mom is getting on my nerves is not an unbiased situation, because it depends on where my sister is with my mom at that point. And then if me and my sister are both in agreement that she's getting on our nerves, the conversation is different than when we aren't.
Yes.
You know, and vice versa. So, you know, when my mom's on her nerves, we can have these conversations that will help or hurt the situation. And if we're both in the same place or in different places, it's not as productive. So when we talk about having an unbiased person to speak to, I think grief is one of those things, because going to my dad to tell him how devastated I am over the loss of his mom seems just that much selfish, right? Because it's his mom, and he's got to do his deal with his mom's, the loss of his mother now, you know, and while he is older, he's lost his parent. His last living parent is gone. He's got his own stuff to sort through. So I think that, yes, having a support system is great, but I think having that person that does not have a dog in the fight, per se, is important to have, even if you only see them once a month. You know, I talk to my therapist about job stuff.
Oh. Honey, I've had conversations with clients from the rooter to the tutor. Okay, like everything is open, right? But in regards to grief, yes, I would agree, right? Like I think you can support each other, the support system, and say, Dad, I know you're grieving, I'm grieving too. It's okay that we're hurting. This was hard. But you're right, you cannot look to him to like pour into you or help you process those emotions. Absolutely so. And that's where your therapist comes into play, or your grief group, or, you know, whomever it is that you're seeking that support and help from. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Janae. Like I say, you always offer really great perspectives on things. And I always leave with something else to think about as I'm going through this, because again, I consider myself a therapy pro. I can't be a therapist though. Like, no, I can't be one, but I do believe that I've been in enough, I tell people all the time, I've been on enough couches to know, like, your behavior right now isn't right, you know, or I know what that is. I've seen that. I've heard about it. We discussed that in a few sessions before. So to be able to walk away with something else to think about. And that's what I look for when I'm looking for my therapist, is someone that I'm going to leave with something to think about, something that I might even want to work on when it's over. So, and I think everyone who is in therapy may get to that point, but some, you know, the first time I went back to therapy as an adult, my biggest struggle was, as you said, trust. Because I didn't know how this person would perceive me. And I think just in your conversation and the things you say, I think you're kind of chipping away at that boundary for people, because a lot of people feel if I go see this therapist, they're going to judge me. They're going to look at me and make it my fault. They're going to say I am not doing this or I'm doing this wrong, versus they're going to listen to what I have to say and offer advice.
And that should be the case, right? Every therapist should walk into the session with every client wanting them to improve. But we also know that sometimes improving means we have to talk about some hard stuff, before we get to the improvement. But there's judgment in my head makes no sense, because my life doesn't, impact yours, and your life doesn't impact mine, right? So for me to be like, oh my God, she just did what? Makes no sense whatsoever. For me or for the client. Like, that is just not helpful. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen to some clients. I've heard of some horror stories, unfortunately, but you should feel safe in your therapist's office. If you don't, that's a problem.
Right. And I think that's in the myth of, old therapy and someone laying on a couch writing a bunch of notes. I don't know the last time I sat in a session where my therapist was writing notes on a notepad as I was talking to them. I know y'all go back and do it later.
I still do it in.
You still do it in session?
I still do it in. Like, now, mind you, it may be all of 2 sentences that I wrote.
Right.
I don't have a page full anymore. Right? I may have 2-3 segments or 2-3 bullet points, but I do still do it in.
Right. And it makes sense that you guys take notes, right? Because you see, on any given day, you probably see about 8 or 9 people. And we all come with stuff.
Yeah.
Some of us more than others. So I don't know how you guys keep it straight, but you do. I just think that, again, pushing the narrative that it's okay to go to therapy. It's okay to go to therapy and not be crazy, which is what, some people think. People who see a therapist, oh, they're crazy. No, I just need somebody I can talk to help me process in a way that makes sense,
Yeah.
And I was playing a game with a team at work on the phone, and one of the questions was, what is something you can tell your best friend that you can't tell your therapist? And I chuckled when the question came up, and because I'm open about going to therapy, everyone else laughed because they knew what I was laughing about. And I just had to think of something, and it was like, mine was that I want to slap people every day. But that is something I would tell my therapist. And my therapist would be like, okay, so first of all, don't, and why?
Right.
Like, why is this a daily thing for you? And that's what you guys are there for. Like, we're supposed to share that part of that, just like we talked about last week. If you don't tell your therapist who you're suicidal, who are you going to tell that to? That can do anything to help you through it. So I am very appreciative of all that you do, and you do this voluntarily. I don't think there's enough money in the world to give you for what you do and what you bring to Pause at this point. This is your 2nd year with us, and I absolutely am grateful for every bit of what you give us, all the advice. And I've not met many therapists that think the way you do, talk the way you do, and give that advice freely. So thank you. And this has been a really good conversation, and I'm looking forward to next week, because next week, the next 2 weeks, get a little bit deeper for you. Next week is healing from the unknown, which basically I'm going in saying I have this issue, and I discovered that I was several streets away from where I needed to be. So, we all go through that, where we're like, I'm gonna go to therapy because I think I just need some anger management. And then you walk out realizing like you've got these deeply rooted traumas in your life that you haven't addressed. You got anger management, but you've got several other things that need to be addressed, which are feeding that monster inside of you. So next week will be interesting, and I'm giving you just a bit of a warning because I'm not sure. You know, this, to me, it doesn't sound easy, but again, you do this every day. So it
Well,
might be easy for you to address, but I know I've experienced where I'm like, oh, my problem at work is X, Y, and Z, or because I'm this way, you know, the whole I'm just this way, you have to leave me, take me or leave me kind of situation. But then you realize, like, oh, I'm having issues here because of this person. And then it's, oh, no, it's you.
yeah.
It's you and your reaction to this thing. So it'll be fun next week. And I'm looking forward to everything that you have to tell us. And my daughter is moving my light around.
Well,
So,
I am looking forward to it as well. It's not uncommon at all, but it should be interesting to have a dialogue about it so that people can understand. And thank you for being able to just have this platform to speak openly about therapy and treatment and counseling and therapists. I think we are somewhat misunderstood and people don't understand what happens behind the door. And so to have these transparent conversations where we can shed light on that is lowering the stigma, right? Eliminating the stigma of treatment. So I am grateful to be able to be a part of Pause. This is my second year, definitely not my last. I appreciate
good
the
to know. Thank you. So with that, we'll end everything. I'll have the recording posted and sent to you. And I need you to post all of your wonderful information on the Pause page. I have your Facebook linked, but I want to make sure that people can see it because my understanding is that you have a number of counselors on your staff that you can help at 2 practices. You are a busy woman.
I know it makes no sense, but yes, that is the case. So yes, I'll make sure that both of my practices are on there and all the contact information. So we will get that done.
Okay. Well, you have a good night. Thank you. Thank you, Kellen, for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Kellen, did you want to stay and ask a question or you want to ask me something?